And it's looking like we have a deal on Gaza. And we'll let you know.
Mr. President.
I think it's a deal that will get the hostages back. It's going to be a deal that will end the war. It's going to be a deal which it's going to be peace. I think we have a deal.
That was President Trump just moments ago before he got on one of his helicopters to leave for some destination, but is claiming that he thinks we now have a deal. You may recall we mentioned a couple of days ago that Steve Witkoff said he thought that there was a 21-point deal that the U.S. was working out with both Hamas and with Israel. And now here this morning, President Trump says, hey, I think we got this all figured out. We'll see what that works, because he said that it's going to include both hostages released, all the hostages released, an end to the war, and just peace coming out. So there's a lot of things to try to, I guess, understand and what all the definitions mean of each one of those. But anything that's going to bring peace and end the killing would certainly be a great thing. Now, one would expect, one would hope, that anything that the President of the United States has said, especially something that categorical, that it would be coordinated with the Israeli side. So naturally, one would expect that since this morning, right around the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking before the United Nations, and you would certainly expect to hear the same kind of comments there. But as you're seeing on the screen here, first of all, there's a lot of unhappiness with a great portion of the United Nations General Assembly. The minute that he was announced as a speaker, people started walking out. That did not go over well with Benjamin Netanyahu. And if anyone thought, well, he'll be a little bit conciliatory, that was certainly not going to be the case, as we saw when he made his comments. And listen, I just want to, I'm going to play a number of key sound bites from his speech here, which really underscores why Israel is in so much trouble here. Aside from what's physically happening on the ground, there is, in so many cases, a radical discontinuity between the words that Israel officials say and the reality on the ground. And when you get, and then on top of that, then he just gets in your face against a number of world leaders, especially Western leaders, and just trashes them. I'm not going to show all those. I'm going to show one particular element of that, but there was a lot more. And this does Israel no good. If you're a friend of Israel, this is the last thing you would want to hear on the stage today. Number one, he doesn't say anything at all about peace. In fact, the only thing he talks, and he goes back to this theme over and over, is to reinforce how the military arm is going to solve his problems. And if he thinks that's the case, and it's going to be very unclear how that's going to square with what President Trump just said. Because as I've mentioned many times, again, based on the physical evidence, anytime there's a disparity, a dispute between what someone says and what is happening on the ground, you have to ignore what someone says, and you can only go by the ground. That is your truth. And as we have seen throughout this war, Israel has shown no interest whatsoever in actually bringing the conflict to an end. As a matter of fact, the only thing that the evidence implies is that they want to get rid of the Palestinian population writ large. Not just Hamas, not even just in the Gaza Strip, but in all of it, to include the West Bank. Lots of things going on with that fall underneath the primary radar in the West, because we're spending so much time watching this, or the Russia-Ukraine war for that matter. Very little people pay attention to what happens on the West Bank, and believe me, there is a lot there. But we're going to focus today on what Benjamin Netanyahu said, and I'm going to provide some context for his comments, because what we're not going to do here is what so many of the Western media does, which they just put sound bites on, and they don't put any context in, and they let them stand for themselves. We, on the other hand, by the very nature of our show, the deep dive, we're going to do a deep dive and show you the context with what are the things he said. Let's start off, first of all, with Benjamin Netanyahu saying that his country has made the greatest military comeback in history.
And the bold decisions we took, Israel rebounded from its darkest day to deliver one of the most stunning military comebacks in history. But we're not done yet. The final elements, the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces. That is why Israel must finish the job.
That's good right there, Gary.
Want to do so.
They got to finish it. So you hear him say there, just categorically, Israel must finish the job. He's trying to claim that he's actually been doing the world a solid. In fact, for German Chancellor Merz said, hey, you've been helping us out. You've been doing the dirty work for all of us.
General George Keegan, former head of U.S. Air Force Intelligence, once said, if the United States had to gather on its own the intelligence that Israel gives us, we would have to establish 5 CIAs. 5 CIAs. This past June, when Israel struck Iran's nuclear facilities, German Chancellor Merz admitted the truth. He said, Israel is doing the dirty work for all of us.
So, I mean, he's kind of bragging about doing the dirty work. That's one thing. He's implying through that previous soundbite there about the German chancellor that he's doing the dirty work for everybody else, and that everybody else agrees to it. But then he turns primarily on the Western leaders and just kind of in your face dogs them.
Sure, in the days immediately following October 7th, many of them supported Israel. But that support quickly evaporated when Israel did what any self-respecting nation would do in the wake of such a savage attack. We fought back.
Okay, let's take a look at that, because that's at the heart of all this. What happened after 10/7? And we're not going to look at what happened after 10/7 alone. We're going to look at what happened before 10/7. See, what Netanyahu would like to have and what they have bent over backwards to get people to believe is that history started on 10/7. Is that on 10/6, everything was fine. It was just another beautiful day. Everything was going good. And then, bam, out of nowhere, these wicked, evil people burst through their gates, validating why we'd had them locked up in the first place. And then they came and they did all these dastardly deeds. They did those dastardly deeds. Many of them, definitely not all of them. And he repeated many of the things that have been solidly debunked, like, the burning of the babies and the beheadings and all this kind of nonsense that's been thoroughly debunked in Western media. Not forget about what Hamas says, only what the Western media. A lot of this stuff has been debunked, but they keep going back over and over, and he did again today. But history didn't start on 10/7. In fact, let's just take a small snapshot in the 3 months prior to 10/7. That summer of 2023 was just hell on earth for the Palestinian people, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. There were over 200 Palestinians had been killed by Israeli bombs and bullets. There was just death all over the place. None of the things that the Palestinians have been wanting for decades, and you really got to go back to 1947. That's, if you want to go to where history starts, that's where it was in this case. Don't go back to the biblical times. That's not the case, because prior to 1947, there were centuries of relative peace between any Jews who happened to be living in that area and the much more prominent Arabs. As many of you may know, it wasn't until really after World War I, but then a massive inflow after World War II, because the Jews had been, so brutalized by the Germans that they did not feel safe, and they were not even welcomed in much of Germany, even after the war. And so they went down here. The British were a lot of responsibility for why they chose that area, etc. But then they went down there. Of course, then they took over the area in 1947, and there's the what do they call that thing? The Nakba, etc. The dark time for the Palestinian people, where they were forced off their land, pogroms, thousands of them killed, etc. That's where the history starts. So if you want to go to 10/7, you got to understand what came forward before that, and the extraordinary pressure of all these intifadas that have been fought. Is the 2006 war that had been fought in Lebanon, etc. All these things are all a boiling cauldron. And the Palestinian people wanted a land of their own. They wanted freedoms. They had none. You may also recall that I think it was 2013 where then President Obama went to Israel and says, we need a two-state solution, and there needs to have some kind of peace and some kind of hope for the people of Palestine, or there's not going to be peace for anybody. Big famous speech, he said, which got thunderous applause even in Israel at that time. But Netanyahu was against that, and he's been in and out of the prime ministership many times, but he has been adamantly against that and has thwarted every opportunity. So if you ever wanted to avoid 10-7, then you could have reduced the pressure by having some kind of freedom and a possible route of hope for Palestinian statehood before that. Now, as you're going to hear in a minute, and elsewhere in this speech, Benjamin Netanyahu says, no, we're not going to do that because that would be a reward for 10-7. But I don't know what his excuse would have been before 10-7 when they still adamantly refused to have a two-state solution. Folks, I know a lot of you don't like to hear this. A lot of you don't want to hear any story other than Israel was the victim on 10-7, and that's the only victims that there are, ignoring the hundreds of Palestinians who were murdered prior to 10-7 that summer, and the thousands over the years before that, and the fact that they have been adamantly blocked and refused any possibility of having a freedom or a hope. I mean, they literally they called it an open air prison for a reason. It was a fence that was surrounded. They had no freedom to do anything. They had limitations even in going into the ocean. They couldn't even do fishing without the approval of the Israelis. So all of that went into the prior to 10-7. Now, he's right in certain regard. Once this terrorist action took place, it was within their rights, even with all the bad stuff that had happened, to go after the people who perpetrated these murders. No one would deny them that, not even me. I would not. Once you took that action, no nation on the earth is, from a position of power especially, is going to be passive in regards to that. You're going to pay a price, and those who did it will pay a price. But history didn't start there. And in fact, as I warned on CNN 2 months in, and I actually did it before then, but I could find the soundbite from 2 months in, I warned that Israel was embarking on a military process to try to achieve a political outcome that would not succeed. I said it categorically, and I think it stands pretty good on time.
Well, I think the big issue with Israel is they got to figure out what is their objective, what is their political outcome. You're using military power to achieve a political outcome. Now,
they've said the elimination of
Netanyahu
Hamas.
says the elimination of Hamas so that he can bring peace to Israel. What he's doing with military will not bring that peace. I've seen it myself in Afghanistan several times, to where the more Taliban you kill, the more the enemy, the more you make, especially when you're killing so many people. And we think we've seen a lot of people killed now. When you get into the southern part, where now almost 2 million people are squashed, the casualties can go even higher than that. And there was a great piece in the American Conservative today by Doug McGregor, who's pointing out the real risk to Israel if they're even seen as trying to destroy the Hamas people and drive them out. That could actually lead to an expansion of the war and possibly even a regional.
You mean
war.
destroy them?
So now I mentioned in the first part of that clip right there that I had seen it. I mean, it's common sense. It's logical. And you've seen it throughout history, that when you go into a place, especially in something even remotely like a counterinsurgency situation, and that you kill so many people, innocent people, victims, that you're going to create more enemy than you had before. I saw that dynamic play out. I've mentioned it, I think, recently. There were, I want to say, somewhere around estimated about 2,000 Taliban when I was first deployed to Afghanistan. The next time I came back in 2010, it had ballooned up to, I want to say, around 10,000. So in those years, it had gone from 2 to about 10. Prior to us losing the war completely in 2021, it was estimated to be at 75,000, even with this big surge we had. So I had seen it myself. I was part of that surge force in 2010, 2011. And I saw up close and personal exactly why it failed. It was as predictable as can be. That's why I said it with such confidence. That was less than 2 months in. Less than 2 months. It was November 29th. Well, if you say, well, did it happen since then? We have validation, not from me, but from the president of France 3 days ago.
After almost 2 years of war, what is the result? Once again, they killed the top leaders of Hamas. It works. This is a great achievement. But at the same time, you have as many Hamas fighters as you had the first day. So it doesn't work to dismantle the Hamas. This is not the right way to proceed.
It wasn't the right way in November 2023, and it's not the right way today. But you see that Netanyahu is just blindly locked in on, we have to finish the job, is what he said today. We've got to finish the job militarily. Now, again, I have to come back. I don't know how that's going to square with what President Trump said right about the same time earlier today about, I think we have a peace and a war. You can see very clearly Netanyahu has no interest in ending the war. He wants to win it militarily. And so they've embarked on this yet another allegedly final assault in the north of Israel, north of Gaza, in the Gaza City area, where he claims the remnants of Hamas are. Well, as you may recall, what is it, a little over a year and a half ago, I suppose, in the southern part, then at Rafah, there was one final brigade of Hamas, and we have to go get them and clear them out. Well, they did that. They almost obliterated the city of Rafah. You can't even recognize it today. It's a moonscape. What happened to those alleged 4 final battalions? Nothing. No silence on it. And then now here they are to get the remnants out. But you heard Emmanuel Macron admitted publicly, you have basically as many Hamas fighters today as you did 2 years ago. And the reasons are very predictable. So what he's doing militarily still isn't going to work. The only way that he can bring peace to his people is to literally eradicate the entire population. Anything that's left over from that, from all of this death and destruction that has been wielded on them for the rest of the time, hear me carefully, folks, here. If you care about Israel, you need to listen up here. This will not bring peace to Israel. It won't. It hasn't. You have a graphic evidence of it. You have my experience before in Iraq and in Afghanistan. You have this now even more graphic evidence here. It does not quell the population. It just doesn't work that way in human affairs. I don't think it ever has. Short of literally annihilating the people, either forcing them out through ethnic cleansing or through destroying them through genocide. Anything short of that is going to leave this population that will want revenge and that will still want justice. So if President Trump comes in here and gets some sort of a ceasefire that leads to an end of the war, that will be great for stopping the killing today, but it won't do anything to assess the consequences and the core reasons why the 10-7 happened in the first place. It'll, in fact, if anything, you can start a stopwatch and a countdown to the next one. Because if you don't change the conditions that existed prior to 10-7 and to give the people of Palestine a future and a hope, then they will have no incentive whatsoever to just turn into mindless just hogs and just slump their shoulders and just say, okay, whatever y'all say, we'll just exist here until we die. No humans can live that way. Understand this. Again, I cannot reinforce this more strongly. If you care about Israel, you cannot support this action here, because all it is doing is absolutely deepening the seeds planted of future conflict. It's virtually guaranteeing that it will continue on. You simply can't treat an entire people group like this and think that they will ever be cowed into abject submission and literally just exist in the rubble of the Gaza Strip, even if the war comes to an end here. And there is no way don't miss this point here. Israel has wanted to finish the job from the beginning of this. They said that they were going to defend themselves and destroy Hamas, but Hamas is still about the same size because of how many people, innocent people they've killed, and new people just fill in the ranks every time they drop it. That's normal. That happens every time you have a situation like this. When these kind of wars have ended, it's because there's been a negotiated settlement to where the other side gets something and has a potential for hope. That's been nearly the only way these things work. That's how the Iraq situation ended up, because the Sunni insurgency was given something that they wanted and gave them incentive to stop shooting us. That's why that one, it came to a relative end anyway. At least many of them, the majority of them. If you don't do something like that here, you can't succeed either. You won't succeed. I can just categorically say it. That's just where we are. One other thing I want to hit here, one more, because this again shows that the unwillingness to be honest in the most basic ways. Benjamin Netanyahu again repeated here that there is no starvation going on in the Gaza Strip and never has been.
Israel is accused of deliberately starving the people of Gaza, when Israel is deliberately feeding the people of Gaza. Since the beginning of the war, Israel has let into Gaza more than 2 million tons of food and aid. That's 1 ton of aid for every man, woman, and child in Gaza.
So yeah, listen to him. A ton per person. It's like, wow, then all these claims have just been nonsense. They haven't been doing that at all. Huh. Go figure. I guess everyone is lying except Benjamin Netanyahu, who's the beacon of truth. Come on, man. I mean, I don't need to even show you what I'm about to show you. You know that that's self-evidently untrue. Every time we've covered this, Gary always shows a bunch of B-roll of just this moonscape of no matter where in the Gaza Strip we're talking about, buildings have just been turned to rubble, and it's methodical. They're just literally destroying any capacity for the place to have any kind of food. And you see these food banks where they have them. They went from what was 400 before this war started, 400 points to where they were getting food aid to 4. 3 of them were in the far southern part of the country, to making it almost impossible, extremely difficult for people to go all the way from the north to the south. That's what they wanted to do. The draw, so the only food source was down there. So even the limited food they did give was a draw to pull them out of areas here, to put them all in one area to make it easier to control. And of course, you should know that I can't remember the exact date, March 3rd or 4th, 5th, somewhere around the early March, Israel completely shut off all the food. And that lasted for months until, under a lot of international pressure, that was turned back on a little bit. But for months, they blocked all the food. So it is categorically a lie, not an exaggeration, not trying to manipulate situations to make it sound like something different. It was categorically a lie. I don't care how much food has actually gone in cumulative. I'm talking about they were starving them to death. People were starving to death, especially the children, malnutrition. Even those who eventually survive are now going to be stunted for the rest of their life. That's how malnutrition works among children. And it continues on to this day. It's still a very, very limited amount now. Now, if you do need, though, any kind of proof, if you don't just take my word for it, don't even believe your own eyes, believe someone who was on the ground, who thought they were actually helping the Palestinian people until they made this dark discovery. Here is former American Lieutenant Colonel Aguiar.
The narrative of there's no starvation and there's no hunger going on in Gaza, that is negligent. That is shameful that anybody would say that. Not only is it evident to the world, I've seen it. So if you don't trust doctors and lawyers and aid workers and NGOs and Europeans and Westerners and Middle Easterners and all these people all over the world, Asians, everybody that's been in there that has seen this problem set, if you don't believe them, you can believe me. I'm an American.
So he was on the ground, and we did a show after he was on Tucker Carlson there, and had a bunch of his sound bites on there, and he just graphically detailed exactly what was going on, to the point that they had these corridors set up so that when people were able to get the food, when the trucks arrived, that they had to go down gauntlets basically, and then the Israeli Defense Forces were literally just taking pop shots at people. They were firing tanks at people. I mean, it was as barbaric as you can imagine. But eyewitness on the ground talking about these things. So when you hear Benjamin Netanyahu say that today, or at any other time he may say it in the future, know the truth. Now, the final thing I want to talk about and brief on what he talked about today is something that gets to the whole heart of this entire thing here. Now, I mentioned a minute ago, if you don't have some kind of a future and a hope for the Palestinian people, you'll never get the war to an end. Even if you get a ceasefire temporarily, which is what it looks like President Trump at least thinks he has. I'm still very doubtful that Israel will even agree to that. More on that when we find out more information. But the issue is about the whole two-state solution. Now, 156 nations have now recognized a Palestinian state. 156 nations around the world. Many of our biggest allies in Europe, they've done that. President Trump is, of course, against it, and it's continued to denigrate anybody who's done it, says it's not helpful. We'll address that part in another day. But the people around the world are very much for a Palestinian state. They want them to have this. Now, it had been American policy across every Republican, Democrat, didn't matter, for decades, that we ostensibly supported a two-state solution. That's what we've said forever. President Trump has been a little bit more mum on that since that time, since the 10-7 has come out, since he's been back in office on this time around. So we'll see where that goes. But in case anyone in the world was wondering what could come next, and they may want to support a two-state solution, Benjamin Netanyahu, in the most declarative way I have seen him say to date, said no deal.
Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it. So here's another message to those Western leaders. Israel will not allow you to shove a terror state down our throats. We will not commit national suicide because you don't have the guts to face down a hostile media and anti-Semitic mobs demanding Israel's blood. And I want you to grasp something else, which is also distorted in the media. I say this not only in my name or the name of my government, but on behalf of all the people of Israel. Last year, there was a vote in the Knesset, our parliament, whether or not to oppose the imposition of a Palestinian state. You want to guess what the results were? Out of 120 members of our parliament, 99 voted against and only 9 supported. That's over 90%. It's not a fringe group. It's not the prime minister who himself is extreme or he's held hostage by extreme parties to his right. It's over 90% of Israelis. My opposition to a Palestinian state is not simply my policies or my government's policy. It's the policy of the state and people of the state of Israel.
Okay, well, I mean, that last part is something he said that is true and is something that's kind of dark because he, first of all, specifically called out Western countries who said they want a two-state solution. And he said, yeah, that ain't going to happen. He just said, we will not do it. And then, of course, he gets back into the distortion game by saying it's like saying we're going to put an Al-Qaeda state 1 mile from New York. No, it's not. It's not even close to that. Hamas was a political organization, and even according to Israeli sources, prior to they're going in on 10 or before they went in later October, there was maybe 40,000 total Hamas fighters out of the 2.1 million people in Palestine. It's the people in Palestine, not the political leadership in Hamas, that deserve a state. But what he is trying to do is conflate the two and make them one. Hamas equals Palestine, i.e., and we hear this a lot from many in Israel, there are no innocent victims in Palestine. There are no innocent women, children, old people, none of that. They all deserve to die. That's just a truth. You can see it all over the place. It's not hidden. It's not in the dark shadows. It's out in the open. Many of them say that straight up. And you see here that Benjamin Netanyahu says, it's not just me. It's not that I'm held captive by a far right wing. He said that's across the board. There will be no two-state solution. But now then he has basically put down a gauntlet to the majority of the Western world. This is the part I'm interested to see how it's going to work out here. Now, many of them took a little bit, many of the Western countries took a little bit of political risk by declaring they recognize a Palestinian state prior to all this. Not a whole lot because it didn't take a lot of action, but at least it was symbolic. But now then, Netanyahu has placed down a gauntlet before them because he's saying not only no, but hell no. We're not going to do that. I don't care what I don't care what all of y'all say. We're not going to do it. And our people don't want it. Our government doesn't want it. And we will not do it. But keep giving me stuff. Keep giving me political cover. Keep engaging with us, etc. He has literally put the gauntlet down and is taunting, if not outright daring, Western nations around the world, and maybe even not just Western nations, but many others, to finally take some action, because he has categorically told you all to go to hell. We're not going to do anything that you want to do. So you can sign a declaration, you can recognize whatever on a piece of paper. We don't care. We're not going to do what you want. Now, the first of those gauntlets is going to be Donald Trump, because I told you right about the same time he says, "Oh, I think we have a peace deal." We still haven't seen it, but Witkoff said that there was a 21-point peace plan. We'll have to wait and see how that's going to turn out. Not sure what that actually is, but he says it has to do with having all the hostages come back in the war and bringing peace. Well, the peace is in the interpretation of the people on the other side, so we'll see what they end up having to say on the Palestinian side, whether this cessation of hostilities equals peace is a much bigger road to hoe. We'll see what comes with that. But this is something we're going to keep an eye on here, because we'll see who's going to be stronger. Are all the nations of the world going to finally say, okay, you've put it down a gauntlet, you've called us out, then we'll react. And we'll actually put some teeth behind some of this? Or will Netanyahu's defiance in the face of everybody still rule the day? Will everyone still cower before Benjamin Netanyahu and allow him to do what he's going to do? Allow him to continue to ethnically cleanse the place until finally he gets what he wants? And will President Trump give in on that? Will he get his so-called peace deal that he thinks he's going to get here? The devil's in the details, so I won't say anything until we see it, because I don't know. Maybe there is some way it's going to work. He didn't say anything about it so far, but that's what we're going to be watching. But that is the bottom line to this. Benjamin Netanyahu laid down a gauntlet here to where he basically threatened the entire world and said, what are you going to do about it? We're going to do this, and you can go to hell if you want to try something different. And it's going to be a force of will. Who's going to have the stronger will? I think that it's not a good gamble for the Israeli side. I think that he is setting up the stage for real trouble for the people of Israel. And as you heard him say, we're all in this together. So we'll see what they all think about this, and we'll see how it happens. I mean, it could go either way. I don't have a good feel for it's going to happen right now. We've had so many decades where the world has just submitted to whatever the Israeli leadership says at any given time. So we'll see what's going to happen, and then we'll see what happens to the Palestinian people. But that's your deep dive for you today, folks. Real appreciate it. We're going to have Scott Horton live this afternoon at 1 p.m. We're probably going to be talking about some of this. I know that's something real near and dear to his heart, but we're also going to look at some other issues in the Russia-Ukraine war. Don't miss that out. 1 p.m. with the Scott Horton live today. Thank you very much.